What Nobody Tells You About Talent from New Street Consulting Group.
Welcome back to What Nobody Tells You About Talent, the podcast series that explores the art and science of creating high-performance organisations. I am thrilled to say today, after being the interviewee last time, talking about the war for talent, I've turned the tables on my colleague, Simon, who I'm now interviewing on his specialist subject, his career, his passion, which is the art and science of high-performing teams. And Simon, you have news for us. We might as well get it out the way. The book.
Yes, Founder's Legacy comes out. I'm glad you mentioned it, by the way.
Well, I thought I'd better.
Comes out on the 19th of March. So I'll
awesome.
Tell you more about that maybe next time.
Yeah. And the good news is I'm in it, right?
Of course you're in it, Roger.
Awesome.
Quotations, branding, everything.
Brilliant. So we'll talk about that a bit more. Well, I'm sure we can get a bit more in. So, look, Simon, I know this has been your career and is your passion because you and I talk about this a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I have a perspective that I don't see many high-performing teams. So the first question I really had was, why do you think teams are important in business?
Fair enough. Okay, so let's start with the great Steve Jobs, who said, great things in business are never done by one person, they're done by a team of people. And I think that's fundamentally right. They're kind of an organizational building block for high performance, probably the most important block of the lot. And it amazes me how little thought and effort businesses go to building high performing teams. When you consider what you said, I think you don't see them too often. I mean, I agree with you, sadly. I have work for the next millennia, I think, if people are going to try and tackle that problem. But I just think, let's just think about the parallels, right? Think about other walks of life. Think about teams like the Red Arrows, the aerobatics team, all that perfection that is so practiced. Think about a Formula One team. Think about an Olympic 8 in rowing. There are so many examples where we see carefully assembled teams practice in the art of what they do, trusting each other, working almost seamlessly. And we know how important that is if you're going to achieve any of those things successfully. And even one of your favorite subjects, football, think about a Premier League coach. See if we can avoid talking about Liverpool for 5 minutes here. Think about any Premier League coach and the work that goes into assembling a squad of players with the right mentality, the right skills to slot into a certain system that the coach manager has designed. And then think about the level of conditioning, the work that goes into preparing them for a specific match, the kind of competitive pressure they're going to experience, the tactics of the opposition, the way he sets up the team, so that the trust, the sense of mutual responsibility, the level of performance is just right in that moment. And then go back to business and just think how little work so many business teams do.
So we've talked about. So I'm going to jump in.
Well,
So I can tell you're frustrated. So why do you think then? So because I think we all stand back and admire those teams, right? So whether it be the Red Arrows, and we understand the performance. So I think it's one of those things. Intellectually, I get the argument, right? And of course there's reference points that suggest. So what, in all the years you've been, what is getting in the way of teams forming, performing? What do you think? Because I don't think there's many people who go, I intellectually disagree with you. So what's happening in businesses that in your observation, that means it doesn't happen? What gets in the way?
First of all, you think about the typical chief executive or a founder, somebody who's effectively made himself or herself chief executive of their own business.
Yeah.
When they move into those positions, typically their ability to build a team and the art of building a team is not part of their skill set. It's not part of their armory.
Okay, so what got them there was individual achievement.
Probably, they hadn't thought about that. And given there's no culture around building teams in a business context, given what tends to happen is we tend to find people who are brilliant at a particular skill, who are brought in because they are great at digital marketing or because they have a certain understanding of technology. We're appointing people based on individual competence and brilliance. We're not appointing people because they would blend into a great team. There's far too little attention to that. And I think there's no culture of that in business, sadly.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So when you think about what needs to be true, what you've seen, so around teaming and that competence, what I'm hearing you say is actually the art of teaming needs to be developed earlier in your career.
Yeah.
And then come through. And it sounds like we were talking last time, I was saying our education system doesn't equip our kids. What it reminds me is even just working together. I remember hiring 6 graduates once and getting them into a boot camp. And the most terrifying thing I said to them was, right, you've got to work as a team. and they kind of looked at me like I was mad because, of course, up until that point, everything they passed exams as an individual. And then all of a sudden I'm like, as a team. And so if I was earlier in my career trying to learn the art of building team, how would you give me some tips? What would I do if I was a younger Roger and learning the art of building a team?
It's a really interesting question. I can't say I've really thought about it from that phase of life. But actually, when you think about it, if you watch, that classic program, The Apprentice, where they basically design teams where they're trying to catch each other out and blame each other.
Yeah. The opposite.
It's precisely the opposite of what we would want to see in a good team context. We should be putting together teams in the very early stages of our education system.
Yeah.
And I think that should start at school.
Yeah.
Because it's a social skill.
Yeah.
It's not an intellectual skill.
Love it.
So we should be doing tasks together. And I think when you think about selecting people into graduate programs, and do they still do those?
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
Good. And also
early careers now, because they don't have to be a graduate.
Okay. Oh, that's good. Yeah, good point.
Good.
Referring back
progress.
to last time, that is indeed progress. So, and then we think about, in the early stage when you're in your 20s, we should be creating environments where teamwork is an essential discipline, really.
Yeah.
Why don't we do that? It doesn't make sense to me. Probably the most extreme example of people who think individual brilliance is more important than teams, funnily enough, I think are investors.
Right.
I'm sorry to pick on them, but here's my reasoning. If you ask any investor, most of them, the vast majority will say, having a great management team or a leadership team in a business is a positive indicator from an investment point of view.
Yeah.
But what they tend to mean is the CEO's got the right kind of background, skills and experience. The CFO has come from an environment where they took a business through to IPO. I want that competence in the team.
Yeah.
I like the CMO because he's got a strong digital marketing background. The CTO, she's got exactly the right technology under her belt to help us to build this successful business. So in other words, they tend to focus on the individual brilliance of these people rather than their capacity to realize the synergies that are available to them. And in the end, that is left to chance?
Yeah.
Because I don't know about you. I think you said at the beginning of the show, really. Is this a show? I don't know what to call it.
I don't know.
But I think you said it when you said so few teams seem to realize their potential.
Yeah.
So realizing that potential requires the level of practice, discipline, and hard work that the Red Arrows do, that a Formula One team does, that a Premier League football team does. It's that level of commitment to the way we work together and the level of trust that's underpinning that. That's what we need to think about if we want great teams.
Fascinating. So I really want to get into your storied advice on how you do that and get practical, but I'm going to just push you one more time around teams.
Okay.
I've seen high-performing organizations and the absence of team. So what happens there? I know we've discussed working groups versus what happens there. If I'm being a dissenter and going, but I've seen high performance. There are plenty of private equity teams that aren't teams, but they outperform the investors' expectations? What happens?
Yeah. Okay. So all I would say is think about the potential performance available to them that's left on the table. So there is plenty of evidence that people can deliver without necessarily optimizing the functioning of their group. And it's also true to say that it's not always a team that's necessary.
Okay.
And I think you mentioned working group. I think it's worth making that sort of comparison. Really.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting because
sometimes a team is the requirements of a team, the amount of investment required to build a great team, the performance that we would see is maybe not worth the investment. So I think of an example, an office move, a major office move. It's a limited time frame project.
Yeah.
You've got a bunch of people assembled with different competencies for a sort of limited time frame. They each have big individual tasks to do. What they do need is coordination. What they don't necessarily need is the level of performance that you'd expect from a high-performing team.
I think that's a great example. That's a really great example. And basically what I'm hearing you say is, yes, you can look at an organization and go, it's performing, but I don't see any essence of team. Yeah. What you're saying is, yeah, but how could it perform? And even against the expectations, you might think they're meeting performance, but there's a whole other level that organizations, and I've spent my career going, actually there's latent performance in your organization you're not tapping into, and I tend to see that from an individual talent perspective.
Yeah, completely.
And what we're getting now is actually you've got that latent performance.
Totally.
But from all of your work and your studies and the great work you've done and your book, you're advocating there's even more.
So let's look at the downsides and the upsides. Your favorite management consultancy, McKinsey, have done. They've done a lot of.
By the way, they're not my favorite management consultancies.
I think everybody knows that by now, and they certainly do now. So McKinsey reckoned that from their research that you're twice as likely to achieve above average financial performance if you build an aligned team with a common vision working together. So that's a little bit of an indication, probably flawed from your perspective, of the potential upside.
Yeah.
Now, I want to think about the downside now. I mean, and I have seen this in the video games industry in the last couple of years. I've seen teams where the level of trust was so poor, the behavior that was consequential from that was all about, you show up to meetings to make sure people are not sort of pushing their own agenda. You know, a team where people's individual needs were taking precedence over the needs of the team, where information was used as a weapon. People were focused on advancing their careers, not taking the blame for the problems that were building in the team. When I got into that team and I started asking questions about what's really going on in this group, one of the most memorable quotes somebody gave me was, "It feels like a knife fight at times." That's how bad it was. So just think of the harm that was doing to the delivery of what was a very innovative product that they were trying to build. I mean, how on earth do you achieve even moderate levels of performance when you've got a team with that level of dysfunction?
Yeah, let's talk about that. So it's a knife fight. I'm in a knife fight, which sounds terrifying.
Yep.
Again, I think if you said to each one of those leaders, hey, for a job, do you want to turn up and have a knife fight each day with your colleagues? They would go, no, that doesn't sound like something I want to do.
Yeah.
So what goes on? Yeah, because I see that too. Right? I see what are meant to be teams clearly in it for themselves or whatever. So what's happening?
So what's not happening?
Oh, what's not happening?
Yeah, what's not happening is they don't know what good looks like, and if they have experienced it, they don't know how to solve the problem because they're in the middle of it.
Right.
I think there are two sets of things that we need to work on if we want to help a group that's in crisis, like that one, or a group that could be brilliant and wants to put in the work to become brilliant to get that right. So, and the two sets of things. One is what I call the disciplines of building a high-performing team.
Okay.
And the other one I call the dynamics. In other words, what happens when we're together, if you like. So both of these are really, really important. So should we start with the disciplines?
Yeah, let's start with the disciplines. Let's do that.
So, and this is sort of based on the work of two guys, Katzenbach and Smith. It's a book published in the 90s, 93, I think, called The Wisdom of Teams.
Okay.
And I still think it's pretty evergreen. It's really good thinking. And basically, they talk about 5 disciplines. And let me see if I can remember them off the top of my head. One is working towards a common purpose, a vision and purpose that they themselves have been part of creating. So you're not sort of working against something that you don't really have any empathy for and you haven't been part of co-creating. Secondly, they have shared strategy and performance goals. So as a team, they work out together what is it we need to achieve in order to hit our sort of vision, and what are the goals we need to set ourselves to hit the markers that will tell us we're making progress towards that. Mm-hmm. Then we got mutual accountability. This is an absolutely key thing about great teams versus working groups. The difference fundamentally for me is that great teams have goals that they know they cannot achieve individually. They have to work together. So there are collective work products that they need together to achieve. When you think about things like profitability, the customer experience, organizational health and performance, which member of the team is going to deliver any of those things? These are goals. These are collective work products. These are things that the team has to work together to achieve. So the reason it's obvious in sport, for example, is, the goalkeeper's not going to win the Champions League. It's going to take a squad of players working together over a sustained period of time. Just so with business teams, a team of people working together in a sustained way over a period of time towards mutual goals. And then the other 2 pieces of that are complementary skills. In other words, the obvious thing is we've got finance, we've got marketing, or whatever, if you have a functionally designed organization. But it's also things like diverse ways of thinking, cognitive diversity, which is a really big deal in teams. And we use that a lot. We use tools to understand that a lot to help make sure teams have got the right cognitive diversity to perform. And the last thing is they have some standards about how they work together. So they say, in this team, we always have the conversation in the room, and we don't go out of the room and start disagreeing in public.
Yeah, which I see a lot.
Yeah, you see that a lot. So we have some standards about how we show up, just as a sports team would. You don't talk about other players in your own team outside the room. So there are a set of standards about how we make decisions, how we behave when we're together, showing up on time. It can be very basic things, but it can also be things like cabinet responsibility, that sense of, we share responsibility and we show up together.
So what I heard was, if I'm sat in what's meant to be a team at the moment, I should have a tick list in my head, which is, are we working towards a common purpose that we created? Co-created.
Yep.
Do we have shared performance goals and strategy? Mutual accountability is a big one. I want to come to that because I do think
come back to that.
Yeah, let's come back to that. There's mutual accountability. We've got complementary skills.
Yep.
And shared commitment. So if shared commitment to work together. So with the known behaviours.
That takes us off into team dynamics, which we'll come back to.
Yep. So can we stay in this one for a bit? Because I do think the mutual accountability, and I loved your phrase, the collective work products.
Yeah.
That feels very different to how, I don't know, words are used in business. So can we explore the mutual accountability a bit more? Because I think this is back to the individualism.
Yeah. People do struggle with this. I think it's a good question because, I remember I was working with a circular fashion business. We're in a very swanky hotel. I talked about these 5 disciplines with them. And the CEO was going, just explain mutual accountability again, please, Simon. Most teams and most business environments are so big on individual accountability. They think that mutual accountability is a kind of evasion.
Yes,
because if nobody's individually
yeah.
accountable, nobody's accountable,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. So this is a bit of a mental leap we have to make if we're going to become a team, I think. So the first thing to say about it is it's not either or, it's both.
Okay.
All right. So
it's an and.
In lots of ways, every single member of this team has got things that they are individually accountable for and will remain so. So I remember that particular CEO going, "Oh, okay, I'm
relaxed.
I
feel better.
I can still hold all these people accountable." But it's another layer, and it's the thing that demands that this group works as a team. Because if we're going to, back to my simple examples of hit our EBIT target, or if we're going to hit our customer experience target, it may not be every single member of the team has to contribute to that particular task, but it's definitely not going to be one. It's probably going to be 3 or 4 people who've got a major stake in achieving that. And that mutual accountability forces them to think about how we're going to work together to achieve that. There's no evasion possible. And that's half the battle with team dynamics. You want to create a situation where you have to work together as a team. Otherwise, you'll fail.
And that, I suppose that's when you get into reward and recognition, right? So I'm pretty sure you see examples where, whilst they might behaviourally do that, it's not in their best interests to do that either, financially or from a career promotion perspective.
That's true, but I mean, at the top level in business, you'll see reward schemes which are, again, both for individual performance and also the performance of the business, right?
Right.
And
that's where you should come together around the mutual accountability.
That entirely reinforces the need for that mutual accountability. It's aligned with the reward system. In fact, when you think about it like that reward system should drive much better levels of teamwork than we see.
Yeah. So that's team dynamics, mutual accountability, individual accountability. Yes. And I think what we've agreed is they're not mutually exclusive. They're an and.
Yeah.
And so the next area, team dynamics.
Team dynamics. So now what we're talking about is if we get the right people in the room, and I would like to hover on that a little bit, if that's okay. Once we got the right people in the room, a bit like the right people on the bus, as somebody else has said, the right people in the planes, flying the Red Arrow aeroplanes, the right people in the seat of your Formula One car, etc. Then we have to create the conditions in which they can perform at their best. And getting the right dynamics is about getting the whole team really working well together. So we'll definitely dive into that.
Yeah.
Just briefly on getting the right people in the right seats. One of the sort of challenges I've come across is that you can't work on the dynamics until you've got the right people in the team.
Yeah.
And so when people ask me to do some work with the team and they're not sure they've got the right people in the right positions, it's probably going to be a bit of a waste of time.
Interesting.
Because they're going to discover that a little bit later. And every time you introduce a new person into a team, it becomes a new team. In some ways.
That's my favorite. One of my favorite quotes. I hope it's in the book. New team member, new team.
That's right.
I think is
that is exactly right, and especially when you multiply that up. And if you think about this in a growing company, a founder-led business, a lot of my work has been in that space recently. You can see that, right? Back to that circular fashion business I mentioned in 2019. This team was, the business was growing, but they were running into problems of executing their strategy effectively. And that was slowing down their ability to scale the business. And when we looked at the team, we looked at the complementary skills sort of dimension of the disciplines. What we saw was a lot of creative energy, quite obsessive focus on getting every aspect of the business right, but very little pragmatic execution-focused energy.
Right.
And so, predictably, the business was starting to slow down and was struggling to scale.
Yeah.
They made some decisions at that time to strengthen the team, both in terms of critical skills that were missing in the business, such as digital marketing, performance marketing, such as a head of operations, And I think from the finance area, we need to strengthen as well. So brought in new people, and we intentionally brought in people who had a pragmatic action orientation and an execution capability and mindset. And you could see the profile of the team was transformed by this. And that transformation in both the competence and the energy of the team transformed the performance of the business. And you saw that follow through into their numbers. You saw it follow through into everyone's confidence that they were on the right page in terms of strategy, and you saw the business start to accelerate.
Right.
It is like...
Okay, so what I'm hearing, big time, is team mechanics, getting the right team members in place is fundamental to getting to the next phase of building a high-performance team. And I would totally agree with you. This is what we spend a lot of our time doing. And back to the point you made about cognitive diversity and getting people to think differently. When we're putting new team members into teams, because frequently we get called and look, we've got to replace the CFO or someone's resigned. We start with, well, let's try and understand the complementary skills. Let's try and understand the cognitive diversity of the group. So how do we add someone who's going to improve the team, improve the performance of the team, or not add to where you are now? So I completely agree with that. So we've done mechanics, dynamics. We've got our team. They're all the right people in the right seats. Tell me about dynamics.
It's a wonderful book by an Italian-American called Patrick Lencioni on this subject.
Yes.
The 5 dysfunctions of...
There's always a 5 in teams, isn't it?
Yeah, for some reason.
I know.
I haven't got that. I've got 50. 3? I've got 50 in my book, so that's totally failed. So yeah, and basically he called them the 5 dysfunctions. I sort of prefer the slightly more positive version of the 5 functions. So what basically he's saying is that first of all, we need trust, and we can come back to that because I know you're going to want to ask me about that. So we need trust. If we have trust, then we are able to have constructive conflict. And constructive conflict is what enables us to come up with the best collective ideas rather than, collective work products, back to that. We can't get to that unless we can have a really good quality debate without anybody losing face or feeling as if they're being snubbed or, so we need that debate. If we can have a constructive conflict, the decisions we make, we're going to be committed to. So that third level, that third function is about shared commitment to the decisions we make as a group. And if we make that commitment, and if we have that level of commitment, we're going to hold each other to account for the decisions that we've made. And that's what we want with mutual accountability. We want everyone in the team challenging poor performance on behalf of the team. You're not going to wait for the CEO to call somebody out. You're going to call them out because you care that much. And if we have that, then we're going to focus on team results. So what's brilliant about that is giving us these 5 functions, right? We need trust, we need constructive conflict, we need shared commitment to the decisions we make, we need to be accountable to each other, and we need to show up as a team. This is literally the opposite of what I was describing from that team in the games industry. No trust, therefore the conflict was suppressed. It's what
knives are out.
Patrick Lencioni would call this artificial harmony. So the knives might have been out, but they were not visible.
Right.
You'd be stabbed without knowing it, and suddenly, what's going on here? And therefore, the decisions they were making, it didn't have the support of their colleagues. They were reluctantly accepted. Nobody was going to hold each other to account for those things because they didn't believe in them in the first place. And guess what? Everybody's worried about their career and their personal future.
So I love how you've taken dysfunctions and turned them into functions and gone I think that's, by the way, genius. I love that.
Should reprint the book.
Yeah, they should reprint the book. Possibly not. By the way, if you're interested in that book, read the manga version. I don't know why all business books aren't written in manga. The manga version of the 5 dysfunctions of a team is genius.
Okay.
It's absolutely genius. Check it out. I don't know why they don't do it with all books. It's got lots more pictures. But let's talk about sort of the last thing we should really deep dive into, I think, is trust. What have you learned about trust in business and in teams? Because it's the foundation. Everything else is you can't achieve anything else, can you? It is the foundation stone.
I think it's got this broad need in business for trust, right? I mean, investors need to trust that management teams are committed to delivering, and as soon as you've lost that trust, you're probably going to get replaced as a manager anyway. Customers need to trust the company in terms of the products and the integrity behind those products. I mean, so trust is everywhere in business, and it's especially present in teams. And there's many different sort of ways of thinking about trust. I love this trust equation where we talk about credibility, reliability, and intimacy.
Yeah.
All hopefully not divided by self-orientation.
Yeah.
So, credibility, he or she knows their stuff. Reliability, they show up, they continue to focus, they continue to try to perform. I can rely on that person. Intimacy sounds a bit weird in a business context, but it really means we know each other, and we have this sense of, I can predict how you're going to respond in certain situations, or maybe I know that I can't predict it, and actually that's what I value about you. But there is this sense of knowing each other and believing in each other. And everything is undone by selfishness, by self-oriented behavior, which takes us right back to the heart of what makes a great team. That selfish behavior is the enemy of a great team dynamic.
Yeah.
And from a leadership point of view, I don't know if you want to talk about how do we intervene in teams when they're not performing, but from a leadership point of view, that's one of those things that you cannot afford to be permissive about. You have to sort of kind of come down hard on that when you see it and massively discourage it. Right. The selfishness is the enemy of a great team, a great team dynamic. Yeah.
Yeah. You bring up the trust equation, one of my favorite equations. I wasn't very good at maths, so it's the one I can understand.
Don't need any maths.
Don't need any maths for the trust equation.
Yeah.
And I think it's quite interesting because I see intimacy being if I took 100 leaders, most are reliable and credible, actually pride themselves on their reliability and credibility.
Yeah.
But when I actually explore intimacy, they sort of, a bit like you, they look at me quizzically and go, why would I want that? So can you just dwell on that a little bit? I mean,
So
how do I build intimacy? If I'm reliable, I do the things I've said I'm going to do, I'm credible, but actually I need to build my intimacy to build more trust with my colleagues. What am I doing?
And I think when we talk about trust, one of the things we know is that the more vulnerable you are, the more vulnerable other people will be with you.
Yes.
So this is almost the call of the age, I think. And so leaders who are very proud of themselves, proud of their performance, proud of their track record are not always big on vulnerability, and therefore they don't get big on intimacy. If I say to you, I'm really struggling at the moment, I need help, and you say, how can I help you? First of all, I've shown you I trust you. And secondly, I feel rewarded for that because what's coming back my way is trusting behavior and support. I think in a lot of teams, people fear that if they show that level of vulnerability, what they're going to experience is judgment, and what they're not going to get is help. And what they're going to get is a sidebar with the CEO and somebody else going, a bit worried about him, I'm not sure that he's got what it takes, or it's a sign of weakness or strength. So we've really got to change that whole approach. And so intimacy is about knowing where somebody's at,
right?
Whether it be on a work level, and maybe not just on a work level, because we are humans, we're not robots. So what's actually going on in somebody's life is having a major impact on how they're showing up at work.
So interesting. So if we just look at the data chemistry have been collecting on leaders over the last 20 years, there are two behaviors specifically since COVID that have been in decline. Empathy, which is odd because you would have thought as a result of COVID, we were all in it together, but empathy has been in decline. And developing self.
Right.
So your empathy is in decline, but you're not doing anything about it because you're not working on yourself. So there's these two behaviors we've seen in our big data sets that have been in decline. And empathy is all about intimacy, right? I'm trying to understand where someone else is at.
So it's really interesting that we could be beyond the time limits of this podcast to really get into it. But there's one thing about that specifically interests me, because there's a lot less sort of working together physically going on now. And I've certainly come across this in teams that because people are usually in a hybrid situation because teams are often meeting virtually. Their level of intimacy has almost naturally dropped as a consequence of that.
And straight to business.
Yeah. So we get on the call. I mean, literally, it starts at 10 o'clock on the dot or whatever it is. Yeah. And, how are you? Are you good? Yeah, good. And then bang, we get straight into topic number one. And so you're not having those moments when you're sort of checking in with each other over a cup of coffee, or you sort of walk together out of the building to take a bit of a break, some fresh air, and you find out about somebody's wife or husband or child and what they're going through at the moment. You were missing out all that data, that human experience, if we're not careful. So we have to work at that, I think.
One of the things sort of bringing this to working at it, practice, taking time, because I'm hearing some of the people I speak to, and probably me, going, where do I find the time to put in the intimacy and the practice and the... Tell us about the hard yards that you've got to reevaluate as a leader if you really want to build high-performing teams and realise this potential. There's some hard yards you've got to do, clearly.
Yeah, and the practice word is a really good word for this, because whether you use a team coach like me or whether you do it yourselves, it's really important to be in the habit and the practice of talking about the way we work together as a group. Not just talking about the numbers or talking about the strategy, talking about the way we talking about the dynamic in the group. So if I do an intervention with a company, what I will typically do is I'll talk to the CEO, I'll find out, how they experience the team, their frustrations. It's often, they're just not responding to me or whatever. And then I'll talk to the team individually and I'll get a whole different version of the story. And I have to somehow piece it all together. And I'm often the first person who's really held a mirror up to the team to say, this is what you told me. And this is a very interesting moment when I feed that back into the room and then they start really talking, sometimes for the first time, about what's really been going on in the room and why sometimes certain things have been a struggle, why we're really good at some other things. So we create a situation where the team can really focus on how we work better together. And you can work at each one of those disciplines. You can also work at each one of those dynamics, and you can progressively get better. But for people who want quick fixes, this is not the work of a quarter. Yeah. This is the work of a year. It takes time and considered effort. And the prize is big. It's one of those things that if you're going to commit to it, do it well, work at it over time. Surprising, actually, how teams that get in the regular habit of talking about their operating rhythm, talking about the quality of their meetings, they cut out a huge amount of waste. So whilst it sounds like it's all more work, some of this is actually cutting out time-wasting conversations that are serving nobody.
I think that's the big win here. I said hard yards. What I meant was, that's what I meant at the time I said it. But I think it's almost like that slow down to speed up, isn't it? I do think my experience of high-performing teams is they are far more efficient. They put time into different things, but they can become far more efficient when they're in the work. Because they've put the time into practice in how to be together, build the intimacy. So look, if someone's
they click,
they
right?
click,
they just click.
And the funny thing is, isn't it? We go back to why don't we see them often enough? Because when I've been in a high performing team, it's the most fun I've ever had. I mean, it's like awesome. You're in the zone, and it just feels good. And so we should all strive for that. I think. Look, just sort of wrapping up on the art and science of high-performing teams. If I'm one of our listeners is going, right, I'm in a team or I'm leading a team. Yeah. What are the three things you would say? Look, I encourage you to, if you're going to start tomorrow, because you can always start. That's the other thing I always tell people is you can start, right? Just start. And what are the three things that you would suggest they go do apart from buy your new book?
Well, don't sign up for some outdoor thing where you have to cross a river with a bunch of planks of wood, some tires, and a few ropes, because you might have a lot of fun. You might even get wet, but the chances that you'll be able to figure out how those messages carry over into your day-to-day work are generally quite slim in my experience. So I think the first thing I'd say is start a conversation about the way you work together, and don't do it in a sort of secretive way. Maybe try and get whoever's leading the team. If it's your team, great. If it's not your team, ask the leader of the team if we could talk about the way we work together, because actually that is the beginning of a team improvement process. Right. The second thing you might want to consider is translating that into data so you can track your progress. I mean, we talked about that a bit in the previous podcast where we talked about how precious data is about talent and how you can use that to drive better decision-making in the business. Well, I think Teams is another example of that. So, Patrick Lencioni's framework is you can convert that very easily into a questionnaire that can give you really great data on how you're tracking in terms of team dynamics and, where you need to improve, and you can have that conversation. And you don't need necessarily to have a reassuringly expensive external coach or team coach to do this. You can do this in-house. You can find somebody who's trusted by the team, who's a good facilitator, who can help in that process.
Okay, sounds good.
That might be a very practical way forward. I mean, I would also just say, maybe my third one is think about those moments when, as a team, you really do need to show up for each other. So, for example, in the strategic planning process, you may only, the convention people only did this once a year. Now, it should be more agile than that. Yeah. But in those meetings where you're trying to work on shared goals and your mutual accountability, really think carefully about how you do that work. Because I see far too often teams where somebody goes away and does that work for the team, and they bring it back and they present it, and everyone goes, oh yeah, that's pretty good, I like that. And it's just lazy. So, when you think about the tasks that the team has to work on together, make sure you do those together and do them well, and design the process whereby you do them well, because that will make you a much better team than if you just delegate that to somebody, or you make it easy for yourselves.
So I think what we've heard is there is huge upside in organizational performance from high performance teams that's not being realized today.
Yep.
And there's some practical steps you can do to really get on that,
on
that journey. Thank you, Simon.
You're most welcome.
Awesome. We are going to talk about your book a little bit more.
Can't wait.
So just tell us about it. Just 30 seconds.
Yeah, so it's called Founders Legacy, 50 game-changing leadership lessons for building a great business. And it's really targeted, probably first and foremost, at founders who don't set up a business because they want to be a leader.
Yeah, I know.
They have their own vision, their own drive. But becoming a great leader can extend your stay at the helm of that business. It can really transform your prospects. And there are so many opportunities for founders to improve their practice in this space. And I felt like there just isn't a book there for them that does exactly that. So that's why I thought,
great.
I'll write the damn
I'm looking forward to reading it. Good. I'm going to buy it. When's it released?
That's one sale anyway.
Yeah.
19th of March.
19th of March. I wish you all the best of luck with that. I know it's going to be awesome. So
thanks, buddy.
It's great. So that's a wrap for today. I think next time we're actually going to bring one of our clients in to talk about the experience of being in a high-performing team and their lessons, practical lessons as a leader. So we really look forward to that.
Brilliant.
But for now, thanks, Simon. And thanks, everyone, for joining us for the latest episode of What Nobody Tells You About Talent.
What Nobody Tells You About Talent from New Street Consulting Group.